Joe Rogan is an internet personality and stand-up comedian. He is primarily known for his podcast episodes that he hosts on the Joe Rogan Experience. The Joe Rogan Experience is primarily on Spotify, which he has originated from YouTube, but he moved over to Spotify because he got a $100 million deal for a specified amount of time, which we do not know because it's an undisclosed contract which he has with Spotify. Now, in this video, we are going to dissect Joe Rogan and look at two differing points of view in terms of how he's received by the general audience. We're going to look at the people that hate him, and we're going to look at the people that like him. And we're going to actually, it's up to you, the viewer, to decide whether or not you like Joe Rogan. I'm just going to place the facts, not the facts, but the viewpoints, the criticisms, the praise. I'm going to put both sides of the coin on the table, and it's up to you to decide whether or not you like Joe Rogan, you don't like Joe Rogan. It's up to you to decide. And then I'll give my personal take on it at the end of this video. Let's begin. So I ended up scouring the internet for differing opinions on Joe Rogan. I looked it up. So I came to Quora.com. Now, Charlie says, my YouTube feed was heavy with Rogan clips. One started with him saying something which made it obvious he isn't smart. It was something that anybody with average intelligence or who had read some books would know. But he immediately turned it around and took over, and that's his talent. Rogan can present himself as an authority on topics he knows nothing about. Which, in my opinion, I think that he does do that. He does that a lot. He presents himself as an authority on things that he doesn't know anything about, and when he gets called out on bullshit, or he gets called out on things that he may know nothing about, or he kind of embellishes a lot. He kind of he's kind of overzealous. He's arrogant. He has an ego, and I obviously realize that, Let's keep going. Charlie says, I recently saw a listing of his background which mentioned stand-up. I didn't know he did comedy, so I looked that up. He just screams. I agree. I don't think he's funny. He's not a funny guy. He's not funny. I mean, in my opinion, he's not funny. I think people listen to his comedy because he has a name brand. He has name value. He has his name, Joe Rogan. Just the name Joe Rogan is gonna... the thought of Joe Rogan being at a stand-up comedy show is going to attract thousands and thousands and thousands of people just based on his popularity alone, even though he's not funny. So I think it's kind of like it's like placebo, or they're kind of giving him an attribute even though he doesn't deserve it, primarily based on the fact that he's famous, And Charlie goes on to say, think of Sam Kinison, but not funny, just offensive, cringe, painfully unfunny screaming, and he said, F this guy. Well, I think Charlie kind of has a bone to pick with Rogan, probably because he's kind of jealous of his success. Chris Coran says, I progressively listened to less and less episodes as time went by. The reasons being various, but mainly because I was evolving. Without a doubt, the JRE made me look at some things which would have otherwise taken me longer to discover. But I also became more and more conscious of the lack of quality among the mounds of quantity. I agree, but in Joe's defense, you can't really put out quality videos, video after video after video after video. The thing is, in my opinion, I think Joe Rogan has already established such a large following and such a big community of fans that he will never, ever, ever, ever stop being relevant, in my opinion. Because it's also about the guests that he has on. He has very, very good guests on his show. I think that if he didn't have as much access to all those people, his show would have died out a long time ago. People would have stopped watching because Joe Rogan by himself, he's not really that much of a smart person. He's not that smart at all. I mean, he's smart, but he's not like Elon Musk smart. Or I know relatively few people are as smart as Elon Musk, so that's probably a bad example. But okay, let's compare him to the average person. I would say he probably has above average intelligence, slightly above average intelligence, but he makes points where he makes a lot of points, and those kind of points that he makes, a lot of the times they tend to be flawed. Chris Curran continues to say, Joe Rogan has been self-proclaimed to be an open-minded Renaissance man. Like all of us, Joe lives in a bubble. Joe's bubble is pretty big, and perhaps in his sphere of experience, he is considered to be open-minded. But he is so fortified inside that bubble that he is more incapable to step out to consider challenging points of view. I agree with that. He doesn't really always have people on his platform that have differing points of view. Not always. He has them on, relatively less and less and less. And when he gets called out on something, he just says, oh, I'm just a comedian, you know? Which is kind of weird. I don't know. Like, I just don't understand. This is a very abstractly summarized principle, but it underpins why I had to leave the JRE behind in order to keep evolving as a person. You could count on both hands the number of topics JRE talks about with all his guests. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really diversify too much. He kind of sticks to one topic, and he always has the same kind of talking points. The show is kind of watered down, and it's like he's kind of using a commercial example. Like it's kind of commercial. He's not original anymore. Like, it's PC. It's annoying. It's annoying because he's following a script at this point. The majority of his guests are comics, which might have the potential to make somebody laugh, but otherwise do not have remotely refined points of view. When there are actual interesting guests on, they end up discussing hunting axis deer, gender politics, or faked moon landing. That's true. I mean, conspiracy theories, deer hunting, elk deer, gender politics, like all of those things he talks about. The Traveling Beast of Burden says, I kind of have a similar opinion. I gradually grew out of JRE like 5 years ago. The topics tend to get really repetitive, with drugs, sports, hunting, and rants against PC culture. Those were fun back in the day, but I grew out of it. Yeah, I think his audience is definitely 20-year-olds, 24-year-olds, 19, 25, 26, at most 30, at best 30. His age range is not 50 or 60 or 40 or even 35. I would say late 20s, and then the lower spectrum is probably, early 20s to late 20s, like teenagers, and then young adults. I just think he's massively overrated. He's a terrible comedian. I agree with that. Yeah, he thinks he's God's gift to comedy and always uses the "I'm just a comedian" cop out whenever he gets challenged on something. I agree. Pretty annoying. Even on his podcast, he's not that funny. He can be entertaining, but just not funny. Those forced hysterical laughs he pulls on anything childish his guests say are cringe. I agree. The whole genuine nice guy act, also, I'm not totally buying. I've seen him be a massive dick and not get called out on it because of how big he is. Of course, because no one can call him out that wants to actually get on his show. You see, the Joe Rogan Experience, he's not going to have someone on there that calls him out constantly on his bullshit. He has yes men around him. All he has is yes men around him. People that are going to agree with whatever he says because they want to get on his podcast. He also takes sides in conflicts that he shouldn't really. Abby Martin versus Sam Harris. He tends to have too much respect for people with a massive audience. He apologized to Crowder and didn't with Brian Dunning. Of course he didn't. I didn't expect him to. I also feel like he is more unhinged behind the camera with his friends, but plays a bit of character for the public. Yeah, but that's pretty much all of the internet personalities. They play a character for the public. It's part of the game. I don't think that's a bad thing. Obviously, he's not genuine when he's on camera. He's not. He's not. Of course not. He's a different person. He's a different person off camera, and when he's on camera, he's a completely different person. He sounds like a giant idiot on anything out of like 3 topics that he's comfortable with: weed, sports, and hunting. I feel like he tends to overestimate himself and his opinions on a lot of things just because he is a smarter than the average guy. Yeah, and this comment actually agreed with me. He is smarter than the average guy, but not a lot smarter, just a little bit. He tends to hang out with lots of dummies just to make him feel smart. Just look at his close friends, Brian Callen and Brendan Schaub. Yeah. Because when you surround yourself with people that are stupid as hell, you're going to be looked at as a smart motherfucker because you're around people like Brian Callen, he's dumb as rocks. Brendan Schaub, dumb as rocks. He's too much of a contrarian, which leads him to say a lot of dumb things like the COVID mask affair. He's not that smart, you know, in terms of he gives opinions on things that he doesn't know anything about. He has a bling sport towards his friends or anyone he loves. Compare how he treated Mencia stealing jokes to Amy Schumer stealing jokes. Of course. He's subtly arrogant. I recall a podcast with a guy called Gad Sad in which all of a sudden he started grilling the guy about being overweight. Was that really necessary? There was another pod with a coffee expert in which he kept condescendingly telling the guy that he loves coffee so much and that he should be pursuing his passion with full force. Like, no shit, Rogan. Dude is a fucking freaking coffee expert and you're not his mom. I think the person that wrote this comment kind of has a bone to pick with Rogan, to be honest. Finally, he doesn't like being made fun of for a comedian that's a bit narcissistic. And yet he loves to poke it at others. Yeah? You had to stop listening to a podcast in order to evolve as a person. How does listening to someone do an interview on the internet prevent you from evolving? That's what Patrick Barnes says. Mayur Patel. I have to cut down for several reasons. One is the fact that it's not easily available as it used to be on YouTube. Also, I don't like his constant swearing, which seems to stop when he has female guests, but with male guests he can be a jerk. Sometimes it's not cool when kids walk in or listen in on me listening to his podcast. So these are the differing points of view. These are the people that don't like Joe Rogan. Now let's look at the people that do like Joe Rogan. Is Joe Rogan overrated? Matthew Brown. I mean, I think he's talented and creative when it comes to podcasting. He's smart at finding a niche that worked for him and clearly is well suited in picking people to interview. He's also quite talented in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Taekwondo. I think he ruins that persona when he chimes in on marijuana and conspiracy nonsense. He's also quite uninformed on religion and the Bible. Treats science as an ideology and the solution to all the world's problems rather than as a tool/methodology for solving empirical questions. Add that to his problematic political views involving Palestine, foreign policy, and drugs. Is he overrated? I'd give him a 6.5 out of 10. Not really worth listening to. Every now and then he's got good guests and will ask good questions, but overall overhyped. I agree. I agree with him. Now, there's another question. Rohit Sudarasan says, every conversation had on Joe Rogan's podcast is like a small journey. Joe engages his guests to understand who they are, where they come from, what they are interested in. After conversing and idea exploring with him, Joe comes out of the conversation feeling slightly more informed at the end and understands something more about himself. The appeal of Joe is that he has the right temperament and attitude in approaching those interactions. He's smart but knows well what he does and does not know. He's not afraid to ask questions about things he's unfamiliar with, but will need to be properly persuaded to change his stance on topics he's very certain about. Joe exercises a healthy amount of skepticism when dealing with unfamiliar topics, but he's also not afraid to have his mind changed sooner or later. Joe talks to as many different kind of people as possible: sports persons, politicians, musicians, artists, actors, scientists, authors, journalists, entertainers, comedians, and he actively listens. He can appreciate and usually empathize with different points of view without being wedded to any of them. He'll often be upfront and honest to his guest while being courteous. At the same time, he's no pushover or sycophant either. From what I've seen, I imagine there might be some exceptions. We as podcast listeners go exploring with Joe as he steers through the conversation with us in the passenger seat. Listening to him enthusiastically ask questions raises his concern about something which we might share and tussle with the unfamiliar in order to be more aware and informed. He's not perfect. He admits it, and we, the listeners, can relate to that. The Joe Rogan Experience boasts an impressive guest list in the hundreds of episodes it has aired, but it's Joe's personality, approach, and expertise in several domains of knowledge that can help produce lively conversations that make people want to hear them. Well, Joe Rogan is not an expert on science. He's not an expert on any of those things. He's an expert in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and martial arts and comedy. But even comedy, he's not really funny. He just screams into the microphone, which is okay, I guess, but he's not funny. He's not a funny guy. And I think most people would agree with me that he's not a funny person. Elizabeth Wilkins Plumley says, he's a right-wing bro who makes people feel good about their biases. I had a professor who said, if you want to study psychology and truth, you will labor in poverty and obscurity. However, like Skinner or Watson, if you want to solve and reify the wrongness people already believe, you will be very rich. My mother, less academic, a car salesman, called it early American circus. Evoking P.T. Barnum, you must dazzle but not intellectually intimidate the rude to fleece their pockets, all while making them thankful for the experience. That is crazy. That is crazy, dude. Why does Joe Rogan get so much hate? Russell Spear says, Joe Rogan dominates his field. Anytime someone dominates his field, there are people that are going to be envious. That envy can lead to hatred. However, I'd say you are looking at him from a very negative mindset. Not that that should come as any big surprise here. It doesn't. How would he get so many well-liked, highly popular, influential people to agree to come on his show and be interviewed by him if he's so hated? Seems to me that someone who chooses to be interviewed by 2 or 3 hours by Joe Rogan probably thinks fairly well of him. If not, they'd just let someone else interview them, wouldn't they? But in conclusion, my opinion on Joe Rogan is that he is a very talented person. He's smarter than the average person. He's definitely got a lot of charisma. He works out. He's a man's man. He's a man's man. He's the guy that everybody wants to be. You know, everybody wants to be Joe Rogan. Everybody wants to be him. Everybody likes him. He's the guy that's polarizing. But in my opinion, I don't like him. I don't think he's that smart. I think he definitely needs to. I think he should work on getting people with opposing views a bit more on his podcast. And I think he should think about what he's going to say and just and take accountability for things that he says instead of saying, oh, I'm just a comedian. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all of you. And I'm out. Peace.